I want to help your business today by talking a little bit about succession planning. I want to get you an idea of what it is, what it really means, and how it's such a powerful tool that is not properly used by many businesses. At its simplest, succession planning is about what happens in succession, right? What happens as a business changes and evolves. And so naturally, over a course of time, a business is going to change. Even a business with constant ownership is going to change with respect to the products it offers, the services, right? Technology and the world is going to keep beating the drum. And regardless, every business is going to have to change with the realities of time. Even an old-time country store is going to change its product lineup with time, and it's going to change the nature of how it gets products delivered to it and the nature of its customer base. Everything is changing. That is just the real world of business. But what we're really often thinking about with succession planning is not changing the business, not changing the products and services. That is assumed to be happening. What we're really talking about is changing of ownership, changing of control to have a succession. Because eventually all of us are going to change. Our age is going to get older, obviously, and some of us will eventually no longer be able to work, will eventually get disabled, die, etc. Or maybe we just want to move on to retirement or other interests, right? So there is a natural progression in life. And so succession planning is about recognizing that reality and implementing a plan around it. Now, a lot of people, for whatever reason, don't do this. Maybe it's because the march of time is slow. You and I, as we are going through life, time is moving very slowly. And so every day is almost like the last day. But over a course of 10 or 15 years, you can feel the effects of aging. You can feel the expected experience. Things happen and develop, right? So even if you're going very slowly through life, things are changing for you and things are changing around you. And so we need to recognize the fact in businesses, particularly small businesses, family-held businesses, that we need to figure out what's going to happen when people move in and out of the business. And so we need to have a plan in place. And that's where good succession planning comes in. What happens when the owner of the company dies? Where does the ownership interest go? We could be as simple as just cutting to the person's will or trust or estate plan and saying, okay, all the ownership is here and it goes to these people. Well, absent special planning, it's probably going to the spouse and or children. And a lot of that's going to be driven by state law, where the person resided at the time that they died, right? And that may make a major difference. Some states treat children differently than others. Some pass it all to a spouse, some pass it to a spouse and the children. Regardless, that ownership interest is moving if a person dies. And so that is the simplest form of succession planning. And if done in a coordinated manner with the business, could potentially be appropriate, right? We know that the ownership is going to shift to the spouse. Maybe everything stays the same until, the spouse passes. That might be a very simple succession plan. And that may work in a business that's owned by one family and one, set of parents. Now, if we fast forward into more likely scenarios or more problematic scenarios, what if there's a business partner involved? What if there's multiple children involved? Now we start adding layers of complication to it that really make us want to think about our succession plan. So if there's a spouse involved, if there's children involved, then we need to think about how do we know who's going to be in the business and what does that dynamic look like? A lot of business partners tell me they don't want to be in business with the spouse of their business partner. Right, so they selected their business partner for a reason. They have a business synergy, they get along, they, agree on how business should be developed and grown, et cetera, et cetera. There are reasons why business partners come together. But when we start bringing a stranger into the equation, i.e. the spouse of a business partner, then a lot of things start to change, right? A lot of people start to scratch their head and say, is this a good thing? Does this really work? Do I need to change something? And so if we can do that planning in advance, we can talk about that before we get to that critical juncture where we might fracture a business over a change of the ownership, a change of the participant. Similarly, if a person who owns a business has multiple children, in general, the best time to work through the dynamic of what's going to happen if the parent passes and the business goes to the children is before we hit that critical point. Families these days, and I think it's been true for a long time, but it's probably even more true now, they tend to have children that have different personalities. They have different styles. They have different interests. Some of these children don't want to come back into the business, right? Because one of the standard answers is, hey, when I pass, a parent's going to say, when I pass, I'm going to pass my business to my children. Well, guess what? Some of the children don't want the business. Maybe all the children don't want the business. Maybe only one of the kids wants the business. Let's imagine a parent with 3 kids and one of them wants the business and the other 2 don't. Well, how do you handle that fairly? Because that child is going to have to take over presumably the entire business, right? You're not going to cut the business into thirds and sell 2/3 of the business to liquidate to take care of the 2 kids that don't want to be in the business. And the one child that's running the business essentially in many ways becomes almost an employee of the other kids if we don't do anything special to plan, right? So we got to talk about these things in advance. You can also add other layers of complexity in families, which are very realistic. What if there's a disabled child? Maybe you have some childs that are, fully abled, and you have some childs that have different abilities. How do you plan for that? What do you do to make sure that everybody's taking care of everybody? In some families, it goes very easily. I've worked with families where, maybe one of the parents is, looking to do succession planning. One of the children is willing to run and grow the business. And the other child is stepping back and saying, hey, I'll run the business on behalf of, my siblings. And as long as the siblings are agreeable, that may work. But in other cases, we get into these fights, and I've witnessed that as well. I've seen siblings get into fights over the business. And that could have been avoided had we put a structure in place where there was clear leadership or a clear pathway. What you really don't want to do is get an even number of siblings that are disagreeing over the business. And that has happened in the history of business law. It is a possible path, right? And so let's say the parents die and there's 4 or 6 kids, and those 4 or 6 kids all disagree about what the business should do next. That can get very, very ugly. Kids could start teaming up in the voting blocks, doing things to try to circumvent each other. It's just not the legacy you want to leave. And so succession planning is all about sitting down with your lawyer, looking at your business, looking at the value, looking at the income, looking at the probable situation for the future, and thinking about how do we treat everybody fairly and how do we keep the business going. Because your planning goes beyond just getting your wealth out to your family. In most businesses, there are also employees that are not family members. And these are probably, many cases, these feel like friends. They are almost family members. They're people you care about, people you want to provide for. And maybe that business is providing them the income and helping them maintain a household and to raise their family and to send the kids to college, et cetera, et cetera. The business becomes an important part of the life, not only of the owners, but of those key employees as well. And so a good succession plan also tries to keep that business on the tracks, growing and growing, so that we don't have a situation where those children or those employees feel left out, right? They are ignored. So succession planning is about getting all of that in order. And how do you do this? You sit down. You understand what your business is. You understand the value of your business. You understand the cash flow of your business. You understand your family structure. And whether that's a simple structure where you have spouses and children and a clear plan to move it forward, or maybe you have a family where there's been multiple marriages, children from different marriages blended together, that becomes a different succession plan. having, kids that don't want to be in the business. All of this gets custom blended. And I'll tell you, it's one of the most interesting and fascinating parts of my job. I enjoy doing this with clients, but it becomes very, very personal and very, very custom to sit down and talk about what is your situation? How do you get along with the kids? What is the level of trust? How are we going to move that forward? So I encourage you to have this conversation sooner than later. Think about your plan. Get a plan in place and start building from there. If you have questions or comments that are general in nature, feel free to drop them below. Don't put anything private, personal about your situation because it won't be confidential. Other people can see your comments. But I do appreciate them when you can leave them. And if you have ideas for future videos, that's appreciated well. If you're a new subscriber and you want to say hi, feel free to drop a comment below. Again, remember the confidentiality concerns, but I do enjoy hearing from new subscribers, and I particularly like your suggestions for future videos or topics we can cover here on the channel because it helps move things forward. So if you have any of those, go ahead and drop those below as well. Thanks for tuning in today, folks. I look forward to seeing you for another video soon.